leadership that I had a chance to meet Attorney General Morrisey and his amazing team that have been behind today, as well as many of these efforts across the state. And so it is my sincere honor to get a chance to introduce your Attorney General, Patrick Morrisey.
Thank you, Pastor Greg, and thank you to everyone for coming out today. It really means a lot. We're grateful for the hospitality of Pastor Van Hook and for every community leader, citizen, pastor who's come here today. This is our 6th community meeting across West Virginia with our Combating Addiction with Grace initiative. And so far the reception has been very positive. But it's because I think that there's a yearning, there's a desire among the people of the state of West Virginia to do everything imaginable to stop this absolutely senseless death. And as I've been working on this issue over the last 5 years, I've realized that the only way to truly eradicate this problem is to bring communities together and have communities lead, to take their cities, to take their towns, to take their counties back. And we've been trying to simply set up a framework to make sure that as the communities are leading, the communities know that they're going to have state, federal, private help that comes in to assist them. Because we know this is not an easy problem to resolve. It's been building up for a long period of time. There's some who talk about the fact that this is an issue that goes back to the 1980s, the 1990s, as a lot of the restrictions with respect to the prescription of pills started to be loosened up. And we know slowly but surely there was a growth in the number of pills that flooded into our state. When I took office in 2013, I knew the state had a heck of a huge problem in this area. So I actually started the first ever substance abuse fighting unit within the Attorney General's office. It literally didn't exist before that, if you could believe it. There wasn't the focus. Maybe there was some litigation here and there, but there wasn't the true focus to get to the heart of the problem, to fix things. And when I look at this problem, I think about how holistically we have to make changes. We have to look at the supply and continually get those numbers down. We have to go to the demand. What is causing people to crave these products and ultimately ruin their lives and have many people suffer? Friends, family, individuals. Too many people have been lost to this terrible epidemic. And then we have to focus on education. We have to let people know the power of these pills, even though they're legal products. We have to let people know the damage that this is doing to citizens, to families, to communities. We have to let people know that we've already lost a generation to substance abuse, and we're not going to lose another one. So there's a lot that we need to do. But these efforts today, part of Combating Addiction with Grace, is an effort to bring the faith-based community to the fore. Because we know that while there are major challenges on enforcement, and we're working hard up and down the pharmaceutical supply channel, holding manufacturers, wholesalers, pharmacies, physicians accountable, we're working to educate, but treatment has to be an important part of the solution. And here's why. We need people to get better in the head and in the heart. And there are a lot of different ways that that can be accomplished. There are a lot of recovery programs that exist, medical assisted treatment, various rehabilitation within the healthcare community. But I've been a believer that one of the most effective things we can do as part of a broader assault on the problem is to organize the faith-based community. Because there's almost nothing more important than ensuring that individuals are reconnecting with their Maker, and that they understand that the root of many of the problems we're seeing, that demand, is caused by a lot of different factors. pastors, churches, all denominations, every day try to connect with people on a spiritual level. To solve this problem in West Virginia, we also need to do the same. Because this is a matter of right and wrong. And we have to make sure that we educate people that there are folks out there. We're not going to be condemning people, but we need to make sure people know that the behavior that we're seeing across the country and with individuals who are getting addicted not just hurts an individual, but it hurts the family, it hurts the community. But we're here to help. We're not here to condemn. And that's why we use the words combating addiction with grace. Because these issues result from diseases. These issues result from deep problems within the community. They sometimes tie into the sense of desperation that people may have when they lose their job. We're down here in the coal fields. We know that this county and a lot of counties down south have been ravaged with the lack of employment. That sometimes causes people to look for other alternatives and maybe get involved in the illicit drug trade. We have to stop that. But the way that you do it is you go county by county, region by region, you bring people together of faith, and you open up the door to new possibilities. Now here are a couple of thoughts and ideas we've had for the program. We believe that it's important that if you are addicted or you're a caregiver and you're helping someone who is addicted, you should have the ability to call the state helpline to reach out and work with people and find individuals in your area. I've always thought it's a natural for people from the Combating Addiction with Grace initiative to be available when those calls come in Logan County, in Boone County, in Mingo County, across the state. Why? Because if you're addicted, you actually want to make sure that you're connecting with people that you know. People who know the communities, know the problems. So we want the faith-based institutions to be on the front lines. You are on the front lines. And all we're here today to do is to say, we're willing to do anything imaginable to provide the resources and the backup to help communities lead to solve the problem. Faith-based treatment works. Faith-based treatment has to be an important part of what we're doing. Now, there are a lot of forms of treatment that we need to explore. So faith-based treatment isn't the only one. But what could be better, once again, than getting people right in their heads and in their hearts? We know that the recidivism rates for faith-based treatment, that they're actually better than many, many programs. And they unite people within the community. Now, we've been going around the state. This is our 6th meeting. I'm very fortunate, by the way, Pastor Greg has come in from Ohio. I'm not ashamed to say that this wasn't originally my idea. I actually had some good conversations with the Ohio Attorney General, who had started to embark on something very similar. And Pastor Greg Delaney was involved in Ohio. So we started getting a few AGs together, and I thought this is important to advance in West Virginia. Because it doesn't matter if it's your idea, it matters whether it's a good idea. And I really am grateful for the amount of time. Here's an individual coming in from another state, helping out because he wants to save people's lives and get our state better. We're all lucky and fortunate for that. When we have these meetings, we try to bring people together across the board. Faith-based leaders, first responders, law enforcement officers, community leaders. We need everyone involved in this. And we have to institute it on a regular basis. After some of these faith-based meetings we've been able to pull together groups that now have durable institutions, maybe a 501c4 or other groups. And if we could do that across the state, then these are institutions that will last. And they will be tied in with the faith-based community. Because the faith-based community must last as well. So I'm appreciative of the opportunity to be here today and to ensure that we're doing everything we can, imaginable, to fight this terrible epidemic. We're fortunate we have a good team in our office. Brooke Albright has done a phenomenal job in our office, kicking this off, spearheading it. We've got Michael and Tyler and a number of people who spend a lot of time every day, because this is the number one priority for us as a state. We can't keep consigning generations to senseless death. But I think today, looking at the crowd here, we can make a difference in Logan County, Boone County, Mingo County, Wyoming, McDowell, across our great state. But I ask you, when you listen to people today, ask yourself, how can I plug in for the future and get engaged? So it's not just coming to a conference for a day. It's about permanent engagement and activism to help your family, friends, and neighbors, because it's the right thing to do, and we have to solve this problem. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Pastor Greg. Thank you all very much. Yeah. You know, I'm actually going to do one more thing, which I think is important. If we could do the clicker. Can you guys read that at all? I think it was in the white background. We're sorry about that. I want to tell you one story, which is a very poignant story. It's touched me. As we've been working on this problem the last number of years, we know that we have to get to the kids. Because while people, when I first said this, said, well, you can't expose them to drugs or drug abuse issues. How many people here think that 8-, 9-year-olds don't know anything about what's going on with drugs? I think most people do. So we've instituted a number of programs across West Virginia in an effort to try to reach our most important ambassadors, the people that are going to be leaders of our state in the future. So we've had various programs trying to get to high school athletes, coaches, the schools. Some of them have been very effective. We also had a contest, if you can read this here, which tried to get to grammar school folks in an effort to touch them, educate them about the problem. And there's one entry that really has always moved me. There's a little girl, her name is J.C. Chalmers. And you can see, if you look at the slide above, she lost her father to substance abuse, drug overdose. And when I called her a couple years ago, after she had submitted her entry, it was a gut-wrenching conversation, because we talked about why she wanted to submit an entry into this contest. And she said to me very simply, Mr. Attorney General, I just want to help ensure that no other little girls and boys lose their daddies to drugs. You can see here a picture of JC, and I just want to read it to you, the note. This is a picture of me and my daddy and my little brother. I love my daddy so much. Then the next week, my daddy died from taking drugs. I cried and cried. I miss my daddy. I want to hug and kiss him every day. It's very sad when kids don't have their daddy to play with now. I still cry when I think about my daddy. Ladies and gentlemen, there are a lot of J.C. Chalmers in West Virginia. They're wonderful little girls and boys. They didn't deserve this. We have to make sure that the next generation has many fewer people that go through what JC is going through. That's part of the reason why we do this. JC's touched a lot of people. I hope JC touches you today. Thank you.
Disorder. Over 21 million people nationwide suffer from addiction. That's 1 in 7 people. Recent increases in the use of opioids has compounded the problem. Each day, we lose 144 people to drug overdoses, and that number climbs to 375 if you factor in alcohol-related deaths. Scientists first began to understand addiction as a brain disorder in the 1950s. Doctors Olds and Milner, in laboratory studies of rats, found the parts of the brain affected by addiction. But then, in 1994, doctors Volkoff and Schelbert, top neuroscientists, ran PET scans of the brain that showed the effects of substance use disorders. Like other diseases, these scans showed it affected tissue function. There are two main parts of the brain affected by drug use: the limbic system and the cortex. The limbic system, located deep within the brain, is responsible for our basic survival instincts. So when you do essential things to stay alive, like eat, drink, find shelter, have sex, or care for your young, your brain reinforces behaviors that cause the release of dopamine from this region. That reward for surviving is also transmitted to the amygdala and hippocampus, which records a memory of that feeling, so we seek it again. This is our survival hardwiring. Addiction also affects this area up here, in the prefrontal cortex, which is what separates us from other animals. This is where decision-making and impulse control live. When drugs or alcohol are used, they activate the same dopamine process in the survival center, and when use is repeated, that substance can hijack that part of the brain. This hijacker changes the brain and weakens this system to make it believe that the primary need for survival is the drug. In hijacking the brain, it can usurp those primary motivations: food, water, shelter, sex, and protecting our young. And the hijacker needs more and more of the substance to activate the same level of reward or feeling of pleasure, causing the brain tissue to become increasingly damaged with continued drug use. So why don't all people who use alcohol or drugs become addicted? There are factors that contribute to the development of a substance use disorder, including individual factors, like genes and age of exposure, and then environmental factors, like drug availability. But there is good news. Addiction is preventable. The key factors that aid in preventing addiction can be categorized into two parts: risk factors and protective factors. Protective factors range from parental involvement, programs that improve self-control, limiting availability, and increasing attachment to your community. Another key element in preventing substance use disorders is to delay when use begins. Put simply, prevention is about delaying the onset of first use. In the adolescent brain, where brain tissue is more vulnerable, the hijacker is more prone to weaken the brain and plant itself as a disease. Those with substance use disorders commonly initiate first use much earlier, between 12 and 18 years old, which increases the likelihood of the hijacker taking hold. But if the hijacker takes hold, addiction is treatable. Advancements have been made in assessments, detox, treatment programs, recovery supports, and medications to treat addiction. Brain scans show that once in recovery, the tissue in the limbic system and cortex can get better. With your help, we can expand these innovations to help millions of individuals and families and ensure that addiction is treated as the medical issue that it is. Together, we can solve this. Join us.
Well, good morning again. I'm Pastor Greg Delaney, and had the wonderful opportunity, as I mentioned, to go around with Mr. Wine and now Attorney General Morrisey and kind of talk about this. And I like that initial video today because it comes from a partner that we have, the Addiction Policy Forum. And Jessica Nichols is a wonderful leader of that out of D.C., and she's starting to make her way into other states just to bring a simplified idea of what's going on with folks who are dealing with this from a substance use perspective and what's going on in the brain. And I think it's important because sometimes we get into this idea that it's all about somebody's choice. And I will tell you that pastorally and as I travel in a lot of churches, I get a lot of church leaders that say, you know, these guys are moral failures. They're bad folks. That's not the case. In 2008, I nearly died from a substance use disorder with alcoholism. My liver was failing, I was bankrupt, I was losing everything in my life, and the last thing in the world I wanted to do was be addicted. But it started with a choice. And in that choice, through a lot of other things that were mentioned in there, genetics, environment, pressure, stuff I was dealing with in my life, it led to 15 years of absolute hell for me. And nearly took me off the planet. But thanks to a pastor who came to my hospital room, and he was from a different denomination. Oh. He shared with me the hope that life could begin again, that there was something in the windshield for me again. And it was through him exercising his faith, sharing his hope with me, that I was able to begin to find recovery. And then he was a wonderful opportunity for me to enter back into ministry, and have been doing that ever since. And so I come to you as a person in long-term recovery. I'll have 10 years in July. And so I come to you with that experience. So you heard a little bit in the video how this works, and just real simply, how drugs and alcohol work is I feel good, I use it to feel better, to reduce the noise in my life. Then I start to need them in order to feel normal. I probably can get a witness in here from somebody like that who's been through this, and then craving it, and then the fear of withdrawal. And I will tell you this, for opiate addicted people, the fear of withdrawal is awful. Awful. And it will cause folks to do things that they never, ever would have ever contemplated doing. And so that's when we get into this, oh, they're bad folks. No, sometimes that driving force is more than they can handle. And I apologize for the format there a little bit, but we heard some of the risk factors in that video of things that can lead people into addiction, and into addictive issues and addictive challenges. And some of them are there: mental health, depression, childhood trauma. We're going to talk a little bit about that, because that is becoming an area that the faith community can really step into and begin to make an enormous difference, because you're having opportunities to connect to people on a frequent basis. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a second. But some of the other risk factors that are there. But I wanted to let you know that addiction often has been described as like a dog with a bone. It never wants to let it go. It bugs you, that dog, until he gets what he wants. I have a little dachshund. His name is Lincoln. Lincoln knows my routine. Lincoln knows I get up in the morning, I exercise, I get a cup of coffee, I go down to write, and as soon as I sit down to write in the morning, Lincoln comes up to my leg because he knows I have treats next to where I write. And so Lincoln knows it's time for a treat. And so he comes, and he's got this, I call him Mr. Pause, to get his treat. People that are dealing with this, it's like that, man. It becomes such an integral part of everyday life that I've got to have that. It becomes part of the routine. And so it never forgets where it used to getting its bone. He comes back and he thinks that it's going to get a bone anytime you do anything that reminds him of a bone. And we talk about triggering behaviors, you know. I have a lot of people say, hey, can you really go back to a bar and have dinner? Can you handle things at BW3s? And yes. But I'm also very cautious. I took a gentleman to treatment earlier this week. Jay's 53 years old. He's really, really sick, but he's in Jacksonville this morning. He's doing great. But I would never consider taking Jay to a bar, because it would only remind him of where he's been. And so these are some things that are going on in the brain that people are dealing with. And the interesting part from a faith-based perspective is often drugs can give the perception of something that's normal. If you take a look at this molecule for THC, it looks a lot like a brain chemical that's naturally produced. And so from a pastoral perspective, I will tell you that opiate abuse, addiction, those cravings, all of that stuff, it is rooted in a lie. If you read Galatians 5 pretty clearly, it says, when I don't live God's way, I get all kinds of stuff that's not great. If you read in Peterson's Message Bible, it actually says I get uncontrollable wants, never satisfied wants, and uncontrollable addiction. And so what I want to let you know is we're dealing with something that's not only physical and mental, but we're most certainly dealing with something that's spiritual, and that's why you're here today. Because you guys get that part of the equation, and you know that we can use the things that we know about that in order to help. So if you ever want to read about neuroplasticity in your brain, you just learned a little bit about your brain, and you want to know how the Lord fits into that, this lady is amazing. She has done some amazing work in this. Christine Kane, this book is amazing. She's also got ways to detox. But I always come back, and you're going to hear this passage of Scripture again from one of my dear friends later in the day, Tim Kraft. But when I had somebody come alongside and begin to push out some of the lies and trauma that I was believing in my brain and replace them with truth, Romans 12 came to light for me because I was able to renew my mind. And as I was able to renew my mind with truth, then John 8:32 instead of John 8:44 took over. And what does truth do? It sets us free. And so that's part of the message for today. So what we do across the state of Ohio, and here we're looking to empower faith-based capacity. And I use the word empower. I was talking to Pastor Mike before we got started today. Often we end up just focusing in on symptoms, and maybe if I give them something, then they'll go away. No, we're looking for you, as Attorney General mentioned, to come alongside and begin to empower others to find their way through this challenge. And the only way that we're going to do this is side by side and being invested one to another, connected to one another. This is roll up your sleeves, dirty work, church. We can't fix it with a program. We're going to have to fix it with relationship. And so I want you to kind of watch this. So what this is the DEA had come to Ohio, and I'll see if you can get that fixed. We have a couple other videos down the road. The DEA came to Ohio, and they came to Dayton because we're pretty messy in Dayton. If you watch the news, we're on a lot. And so the DEA came, and they wanted to do some events, and they called it the Power of You. And the Power of You event was an opportunity for them to come, and we had about 400 or 500 people come to one of the arenas. And we really did an idea of just what we're doing here. What is the power of you? And so with kind of a surprise to me, the DEA came and said, we want faith to help us. So they invited us to the table. And we're going to talk a little bit about how faith is now most certainly invited to the table in dealing with this challenge. But in this particular regard, we were able to do some public service announcements, hold an event. Now we're getting ready to do some prevention things for kids. And it all was stemmed and being supported by the DEA, because the DEA had actually picked 4 cities this year to go and do this initiative. And so here's the cool part about that, and the reason I share that with you is exactly what A.G. Morrisey said. It is all of us coming together, DEA, community agencies, mental health, treatment centers, hospitals, law enforcement, first responders, all of us linking together, putting egos down, and putting the person in crisis in the middle of our conversations, and looking to empower the people that need to come alongside and help that individual. Because I will tell you, individual recovery is individual. What works for me may not work for you. I want to give you every opportunity. And so what we really encourage churches and faith leaders to become are opportunity brokers. Recognize what you have in your community, find ways to understand what it is that they do, and then find ways to leverage them in the best way that you can. So from a scriptural perspective, I love what this says. If you read the prior piece to this, Paul's telling Timothy that things are pretty jacked up. Culturally, it's a mess. But every part of Scripture is God-breathed and it's useful. Because what does it do? It shows us truth. What do we learn about truth? It sets us free. It exposes our rebellion. It helps us to correct our mistakes. It trains us to live God's way. But I love what it says this. It says, through the Word, not denomination, not building, not theology, not doctrine at this particular point. We're coming down below that line today. Through the Word, we're put together, and then we're shaped up for what? The tasks that God has for us. God most certainly wants us to take on this task. He wants us to be engaged. Why? His kids are dying. And they're dying lost. He wants us to come in and be shaped up for this work. Brendan Manning, who was an addict, makes a really interesting point here. He says, the tragedy is that our attention centers on what people are not, rather on what they are and who they might become. Oh, you're just a drug addict. You always be a drug addict. Always be a thief. Always be a loser. Always be a blight to this family. Always be a black sheep. You always be this. Always be that, right? That's not the truth. And you're going to hear from people today that that's how they felt. And yet God has put them in a place